Welcome back. Ladies and gentlemen, as we promised, we are going to celebrate together 80 years of relations between Russia and Egypt. And yesterday, the 26th of August, as we were marking the occasion, Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov exchanged congratulatory letters. And two buildings were lit with the slogans to say that both peoples, both leaderships really appreciate and evaluate these strong ties. Our building of our foreign ministry was lit with the Arabic words Egypt 80, Russia, Misr, Russia 80 سنة, 80 years of diplomatic ties. And on the other hand, you are going to find the radio and TV building in Moscow was lit with the Egyptian flag and the Russian flag all together. Let's watch this detailed comprehensive report about the strong ties that bind the two nations, and we are going to turn back with more. Egypt and Russia established their diplomatic relations on August 26, 1943, when Russia was part of the Soviet Union. During the past decades, the two countries enjoyed historic ties in all domains, and the headquarters of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was lit up in the early hours of Saturday with the slogan Egypt 80, Russia in Arabic to celebrate the occasion. Also, the iconic TV and radio Ostakino Tower in Moscow, once the world's tallest freestanding structure, was lit up in the colors of the flags of Russia and Egypt. Minister of Foreign Affairs Sameh Shoukry and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov exchanged letters of congratulations affirming the special and deep historical relations between the two countries. Shoukry and Lavrov also stressed their determination to enhance cooperation in all fields and foster friendship between the two peoples. The Foreign Ministry highlighted that the 80th anniversary celebrations are extending throughout the year. They include a number of joint programs and activities that shed light on the diversity of historic Egyptian-Russian relations. These include documentary and TV programs and fairs displaying archival and documentary materials organized by the two countries' foreign ministries. They also include specialized cooperation projects in a number of fields. Egyptian-Russian cooperation has intensified over the past years in political and economic fields, particularly energy. In 2022, the volume of trade exchange between Egypt and Russia hit $4.7 billion, up by 16.2% from the previous year. In a meeting with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in St. Petersburg last month, Russian President Vladimir Putin said Egypt accounts for 1/3 of Russia's trade exchange with Africa. Egypt and Russia are also cooperating to establish El Dab'a nuclear power plant in Matruh Governorate, as well as the Russian industrial zone in eastern Egypt. Russia is also one of the most important tourism markets to Egypt, up to 30,000 Russian tourists visiting Egypt every week. As we listened to the report, we were speaking about 80 years of historic ties that bind Egypt and Russia, and there was all the time exchanging visits between the Egyptian and Russian leadership, and the friendly ties between President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. To shed more light on this topic, we are very much delighted to have with us via phone His Excellency Ambassador Hussein Haridi, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you very much for being with us, Ambassador Haridi.
It's my pleasure, madam. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. And let's start immediately, as we do have a lot to speak about. Let's start with a brief idea about the history of relations between Egypt and Russia, which started, as we said, 80 years ago.
Well, we are celebrating today a model relationship between a superpower and a middle power. Through the last 80 years, the Egyptian-Russian relations, or at a certain period of time it was called the Egyptian-Soviet relations, have been always more than excellent, with the exception of a brief historical period in the 70s and the early 80s, when there were many misunderstandings between Cairo and Moscow. But starting from the mid-80s till today, relations have gone very, very, very strong. They developed very strongly. And today, the Russian government, as it had financed the construction of the Aswan Dam in the second half of the 20th century, is financing the construction of a second high dam in the first half of the 21st century. And I refer particularly to the nuclear power station at Dab'a on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. It's a very ambitious project, and it would meet the growing needs for energy on the part of Egyptians. So
this is to say, sir?
This is a symbol. In the second half of the 20th century, the Aswan Dam and the Soviet weapons to Egypt were symbols of very strong relationship between Moscow and Cairo. My personal belief, I personally consider that the Dab'a power plant, the nuclear power plant, is the symbol of the strong relationship between Cairo and Moscow in the first half of the 21st century. 1 month from today, or more than 1 month with few days, we'll be celebrating half a century, the 50th anniversary of the October War, of October 1973. And I always take this opportunity to underline that when the Egyptian army crossed the Suez Canal on Saturday, October 6, 1973, the Egyptian army crossed with Soviet weapons. And we successfully liberated Sinai with Soviet weapons. And we should never forget, as Egyptians, and the younger Egyptian generations who hadn't yet been born on 1973, we should always remind them that our victory on October 6, 1973 was made possible by Soviet arms.
And if you permit me to continue with what you have just said, sir, regarding the continuous cooperation and the deeply rooted ties which really have their tangible results on the ground. You mentioned El Dab'a nuclear plant, which is a very huge and ambitious project. But to add to this, last month when President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi met with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg, there were very ambitious projects already to take place on the ground even as we speak, like the industrial zone, for example, in the new Suez Canal, and with President Putin saying that Egypt accounts for 1/3 of Russian trade with Africa in general. How do you see the continuation of this process?
Well, it comes in the same spirit, madam. Mutual interests, almost identical views on international politics. Now, bilateral relations between Egypt and Russia have been boosted by the admission of Egypt as a member in the BRICS group. The decision that was taken last week in Johannesburg in the BRICS summit, Egypt and another 5 countries, 2 of them are Arab Muslim countries, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And I believe that the admission of Egypt in this group it's another boost to Russian-Egyptian relationships, madam.
And that, sir.
In the context of what you have just raised, let me just underline the fact that both Cairo and Moscow have signed a few years ago what's called a comprehensive strategic partnership. Mm-hmm. So relations between the 2 countries nowadays are being run and being managed in the context of this ambitious comprehensive strategic partnership.
How do you see, sir, the statement which is saying that Egypt is the gate to Africa? And particularly when it comes to the BRICS, since you mentioned our invitation to join the BRICS starting January 2024, inshallah, this is going to be one of the main topics because to consider Egypt as the gate of Africa, meaning that it's going to be a win-win situation for both sides, for the BRICS countries and for the African continent at large, if you want to elaborate on that.
Well, when we say Egypt is the gate to Africa, what we really mean is that, of course, the location of Egypt on the map facilitates trade using Egypt to trade with African countries, particularly those countries in the east and south of Africa. The expression Gate of Africa, that it stands for the various trade agreements that we have signed with various African governments, the most important of which is called COMESA, with some Eastern and Southern African countries. And definitely any exporting country, whether Russia, Turkey, or any other power that want to have access to African markets, particularly in the eastern part and the southern part of Africa, definitely Egypt would be an attractive place to begin with.
Yeah. Sir, just a few days ago, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi inspected the military academy. And he had an open dialogue with its cadets and many of the trainees who were there receiving some courses. One of the trainees asked the president a very direct question about the BRICS and about joining the BRICS and about the balanced foreign relations we have with all powers. And she asked if this is going to have some impacts on our relations with the West, because with the BRICS, they are far from the West, of course, in a way. And the president said, we asked both powers not to involve us into their differences. And he said in a very frank and clear way that we are going, inshallah, to join the BRICS, and if any other economic group is going to be beneficial for us, we are going to join it too. How do you see this in light of our very good, distinguished, excellent ties with all powers, with all states all over the world?
Well, my personal take on this issue is that we should not be, we have witnessed, of course, in reaction, and understandable to a certain extent reaction on Egyptian media when the decision of accepting the request of Egypt and other 5 countries to join the BRICS was announced last Thursday, August 24th, by the South African president. Of course, we've seen an understandable over positive reaction to this. But my personal take on this, of course, it's a very good step from the point of view of Egyptian foreign policy, but we should take it with a grain of salt. We should be realistic in our assessment of the impact of joining this group on the Egyptian economy and on Egyptian foreign policy. Why? Because this group is not like NATO. This group is not like the G7. What they have common interests to a certain extent, economic, financial, and political.
Yeah.
However, on the strategic level, and when I say strategic level, I refer to relations of each member country, whether the old members or the newly accepted countries, Egypt is one of them. All these countries have very complex relations with Western powers, particularly the United States. If you take India, for example, Indian-American relations have seen great leaps forward. India is part of what's called the Quad, which is it's a security dialogue, security, I wouldn't say security pact, but security set of security understandings that includes India, the United States, Japan, and Australia. China, which stands to benefit more from the expansion or the enlargement of the BRICS, is interested in maintaining very good relations with the United States. So the feeling or the idea or the concept that the BRICS plus would be a bloc against the West, this is a position that should be reassessed. And personally speaking, I don't think it's true. From an Egyptian point of view, we don't have any interest whatsoever to turn the BRICS into a bloc against the West.
At all. It's only a way to work together for the best interest of all the member states. For example, when we say that we are going to deal with Russia with the ruble, and with Egypt is going to deal with Egypt with the Egyptian pounds, with the yuan, with China, with the rupiah in India, you name it. This is going to be for the best interest of us with using our local currency to decrease the pressure on the dollar. I think this is one of the benefits, if you agree with me on that.
Well, to a certain extent, madam, and we should not be very enthusiastic about that. I understand, I agree with you that we, of course, ease the pressures on the sources of dollars in Egypt, but it goes much deeper than that. There is a downside for this. And, but I personally, I don't want to dwell too much on this, because I don't want, of course, to be to spoil the feelings of overjoy in the Egyptian mass media about this. But anyhow, it's a good step forward, whether we speak from an economic or financial point of view, or from a political or strategic point of view. But still, that won't be that won't mean that we should not put our house in order in Egypt, whether we are a member country in the BRICS or not.
Sir, if you permit me, one final question, as I'm going to turn back to the Egyptian-Russian relations, because today we cannot deny that there is global financial crises, not only one crisis, particularly with the food security, with the chain supply crisis, with the lockdowns which took place for almost 2 years when after the COVID-19, and with the Russian-Ukrainian struggle. How do you see the importance of working together, Egypt and Russia, to put an end to that, or at least to find some solutions for the crises I mentioned?
Well, madam, it goes beyond Egypt and Russia, madam. The war in Ukraine really has upended international politics and the food security of developing countries, among which, of course, Egypt comes first, given the fact that we are the net importer of wheat in the world. So we should work. We should, and the government is doing its best to say that, to tell you the truth, to minimize, to the extent possible, our reliance on foreign crops to feed the Egyptian people. And but it goes beyond Egyptian-Russian relations, and as our senior officials have always said, madam, we want to see the war in Ukraine coming to an end, because it has so far wreaked havoc on public finances and the food security of developing countries, and Egypt is one of these countries.
Sure. Well, Ambassador Hussein Haridi, thank you very much for your input, sir, and have a very good day. We were very much delighted to have with us via phone His Excellency, Ambassador Hussein Haridi, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Right after the short break, we are going to return back with more, so stay tuned.